This week, I'm taking on a bit of a challenge and I'm brewing a Philly Sour Gingerbread Gose. Maybe a holiday Gose sounds a little out there, but I think this just might work, and this example from Prairie Artisan Ales gives me even more hope. It's got all the holiday spice you need balanced perfectly in a tart cranberry sour. Now I'm going for something similar, but instead of a cranberry sour, I'm shooting for a gingerbread Gose. That means flavors like molasses, cinnamon, and clove paired with a salt and coriander infused sour. And this time, I won't be quick souring or even co-souring. I'm using a brand new lactic acid producing yeast called Philly Sour. Now, let's make some beer. For this beer, I'm going with some local spring water and I'm adjusting the water profile using gypsum, calcium chloride, chalk, and baking soda. It's okay to keep it pretty simple with a Gose, but this one's gonna be kinda dark, so I kept that in mind when designing the water profile. I'm also adding a very small amount of lactic acid to lower the pH. The recipe for today includes 33% each of wheat malt and red X, 10% Caramunic, 7% each of biscuit malt and carapils, and 3% rice hulls. It also includes 3% each of molasses and honey and a handful of spices that we'll get into later on. Now, let's get this thing going. I'll keep mashing this in until everything is nice and saturated. Once we're mashed in and up to the target temperature of 152 degrees Fahrenheit or 67 degrees Celsius, I'll start a timer for 1 hour. Guys, you'll never guess what I just discovered in the fridge. While the mash finishes up, let me show you how not to cold crash your beer. Yep. I was all excited about my new dry hop setup and the lid assembly, and I made a beginner mistake. As the beer cooled in the fermenter, a vacuum formed and sucked about a half gallon of sanitizer into the beer. I hate to say it, but I kinda had this coming. I'm gonna take this as a reminder to keep things simple, and I'll just brew this one again. Also, based on some early taste tests of this beer, I don't know if single malt is the way to go with Red X, especially at over 6.5% ABV. It might be smart to swap in some pale 2-row just to leave some more room for the hops. Alright, enough bumming on this beer, let's get back to brewing. Okay, time to yank these grains and get our boil started. With the basket up and out of the wort, I'm sparging with about a gallon of water. And I cut my hoses just a little bit too short to reach the gigawort, so I'm just doing it manually for now with a big flask. I think this might actually make it a little easier to watch my kettle volume and not oversparge. Now, I'll just crank this thing to full power and wait for a boil. Okay, we've been boiling this wort for about 45 minutes now, and it's time for the one and only hop addition. Normally, I'd use Hallertau here, but I didn't have any, so I went with 14 grams of debittered hops instead. Now, let's get a whirlpool going and start sanitizing the chiller. Alright, we're just about ready for the next addition, but this time it's going to be a bunch of spices. First, we have 2.5 grams of coriander seed and about 13 grams of pink Himalayan salt. Then, I'm going with about a half stick or 1.3 grams of cinnamon, 2.5 grams of candied ginger, and 15 cloves. Now, I'm just going to blitz this in a spice grinder and toss it into the hop basket with 10 minutes remaining in the boil. This likely won't be enough spice to do the job, but it's a good starting point. And we can always add more post-fermentation. Lastly, I need a 1/4 pound each of Colorado clover honey and blackstrap molasses, and I'm tossing that in with 5 minutes left in the boil. You can see in the sight glass that some of the spices I added escaped from the hop basket. Not a huge deal, but I just hope it doesn't gunk up my plate chiller. As the temperature gets closer to pitching temp, I'm attaching an oxygen tank to an inline diffusion stone from Blickman for about 90 seconds. This is a new setup for me, but it's been working out really well so far. The elbow and diffusion stone are from my Blickman Quick Carb, and I just added a ball lock gas post to make it a little easier to connect the oxygen tank. Let me get this inside and we'll get ready for fermentation. For this beer, I'm fermenting at room temperature using a brand new yeast from Lallemand called Philly Sour. As I understand it, during the first few days of fermentation, this yeast will produce lactic acid, dropping the pH of the beer down to around 3.5. Then, it will actually shift gears and begin producing ethanol. It's a beast and quite possibly my new go-to yeast. But since some of the wort sugar will be used to produce lactic acid and some to produce ethanol, I'm a little confused about how I'll estimate the beer's final ABV. Anyways, if you like this video, let me know in the comments and consider subscribing so you don't miss the next one. Thanks for hanging out with me today. I'll see you again soon.